Grade school and college naturally forces books for you to read, whether it's for projects or reports, and all of those years doing it kind of jaded me on the idea of leisurely reading. It wasn't until the 2010s when comic books kind of resurged where I started reading comic books again, and from there I slowly drifted back into reading actual books. Now I try to at least read 10 books a year, so these are the top 10 favorite books I read from last year. Now, these aren't going to be all books that were released in 2024. It's going to be a bunch of things because I like to try and read some classic titles every now and then. But again, there are going to be some books that were released in 2024. So, that being said, number 10, Argylle by Ellie Conway, whatever that means. The mystery surrounding who actually wrote this thing is still baffling and hasn't been disclosed. Was it the film's screenwriter, AI, Taylor Swift? Ellie Conway is the main character of the 2024 film Argylle, a movie I enjoyed so much more than everyone else it seems, and the sad fact that it didn't catch on maybe as well as Apple was hoping for is perhaps why this author mystery is kind of dissipated. Still, credit where credit's due, the book isn't inherently bad or anything, it's just a painfully generic book that has very few surprises. One notable thing, however, though, is the post-credits scene of the film of Argylle is actually a brief blurb in the book, which again adds more layers of confusion as to what the direction between this and the tie into Kingsman is. Number 9, The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. Given to me as a Christmas gift after seeing the movie, it's sometimes strange reading the source material of an adaptation, especially if you really love the adaptation. Characters from the movie that were much more notable are barely here in the book, but it doesn't hinder the overall experience being the same. The book covers all the important things that the movie also did as well, yet I'll give credit to the film's screenwriters where the 2024 movie's ending is much better. Number 8, The Family Game by Catherine Steadman. Thanks to accidentally buying a book of hers by mistake, I've now subsequently read every book in Catherine Steadman's catalog, save for Look in the Mirror, which is next. The Family Game's not as good as something like The Disappearing Act, but it isn't as uninteresting as Something in the Water, which that seems to be the one everyone loves. The Family Game does a slow build to a pretty insane climax set in the cold winter by the end, and you'll probably see the turns coming, but they're very much earned versus random additions. Number 7, Watching You by Lisa Jewell. One of those stories where there's no definitive protagonist, the reader instead is kind of getting a deep dive into a brief moment in people's lives and how they naturally watch each other. Where the intrigue happens is what ultimately precedes these events, and some red herrings that are intentionally too obvious. It won't stay with you whatsoever, but credit where credit's due. The book boasts about one final twist on the final page that will surprise you, and yeah, it did for me as well. Number 6, Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I've read some of the Christmas books classics such as Grisham's Skipping Christmas, Stern's The Greatest Gift, and of course Dickens' A Christmas Carol, but this one was also suggested due to its core messaging. While this is far from a delightful story, it does evoke the feel of inspiration at Christmas and sending a message about helping others and doing the right thing. Before moving on to the top 5, here's some honorable mentions. The Final Fantasy VII Remake Ultimania is a monstrous compilation of all the methods used to create the 2020 game. There's concept art, mythology influence, photographs of objects that were used as a base for the game, and more. Star Wars Skywalker Strikes consists of one of many adventures that Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, R2, and C-3PO had between episodes 4 and 5. It does one of those things where it answers a question that really didn't need to be answered, but luckily what we were given was compelling enough. Number 5, Casino Royale by Ian Fleming. So begins my dive into Fleming novels. I've been a Bond fan for as long as I can remember, and I've seen every film multiple times at this point. Casino Royale was my favorite, and at this point I'm curious to see how the adaptations differ from the books. I'll admit that Casino Royale surprised me, as while certain things from the film are here, it's hardly not as interesting. Adding to it is a lame character exit that happens towards the end that the film handled much better. Different times I get it, yet timeless classics exist for a reason. I dug this, don't get me wrong, but the movie did it better. Number 4, The Postman Always Rings Twice by James M. Cain. Look, all I'll say is that when I was in my early 20s, I didn't nearly have this insane attitude that Frank Chambers, the protagonist, has. There's a Raymond Chandler kind of feel to how Cain makes his characters articulate things, with Frank Chambers just being utterly blunt about everything. Adding to this is his eventual encounter with Cora, which sends both of them down a dark path that makes for an entertaining read, but it's bleak and lacks a moral. Number 3, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This one was recommended to me about 5 or so years ago, just as it was starting to gain notoriety for its concept. Crouch accidentally struck gold with this book's multiple universe concept, something that the likes of Marvel, DC, and Rick and Morty have made popular and tired by this day and age. So, it's a shame I read this one when it finally was far past its prime, but it doesn't change the core messaging here or the inventiveness of how things are done. It was a perfect, one-off story that doesn't really need to be anything else. Number 2, Journey to the West by Wu Chengyan. In Christmas 2023, I was given this book from a friend because he got a copy for himself. The plan was we were both going to start and read this one and compare notes. He was curious about this one because the book was apparently the influence for the show/manga series Dragon Ball, which is probably one of my favorite franchises of all time. We both indeed started the book early in 2024, but he stopped early because, well, life stuff. You know how it goes. I continued reading the whole thing though, and while I will say it's quite abstract to get into, I couldn't recommend this thing to anyone unless you're willing to roll with the absolute craziness that is the first part detailing Sun Wukong's story. If you can get through that, then you can get through the rest of the book, which, save for some strong setup, becomes a series of adventures that tribute notable folklore from all across time. In turn, it makes Journey to the West timeless in its own sense, and it's understandable why it's held in such regard. Number 1, One Day by David Nichols. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen my favorite shows from this year, but this one's also number 1 there. I read the book first, then watched the series. The book starts strong, but hooks you about halfway through and by the end shatters you. Even knowing all that, I wanted to see how the 2024 adaptation would go, and it's phenomenal. It's the book-to-screen equivalent of the Harry Potter films, where what you pictured while reading is actually photographed in its series adaptation. Now, there's a few differences between the book and the film, and I kinda like them both the same. The premise of every chapter and episode being one select day from every year ranging from 1998 to 2008 is an introspective journey into how times evolve, how we evolve, how life truly can fly by, and to appreciate every moment. You can only read the book or only watch the show for the experience. But either way, one of the two, or both, is beyond recommended. If for some reason you're seeing this and have made it this far, this channel is meant to be a journal of sorts, but nonetheless, thanks so much for checking it out. What were your favorite books from 2024?